Columbia, Illinois. A calm Tuesday morning in May 2009, this peaceful suburb just outside of St. Louis woke to the kind of horror that feels ripped from a nightmare. Chris Coleman, a 32-year-old father of two, a security officer for the Joyce Meyer Ministries, dialed 911 to report concerns about his family's safety. He'd gone to the gym early that morning and hadn't heard from his wife, Sherry. It all sounded vaguely routine to the dispatcher, a worried husband, a possible medical emergency. At first glance, it looked like the work of a vengeful outsider. They soon realized they had stepped into a montage of a menacing massacre that would send shockwaves not just through Columbia, but across the nation. What goes through the mind of a detective entering a scene that defies all logic and humanity, yet something about the words on the wall felt off, almost as if the killer had chosen the wrong phrases. Now, if you're like me, you're wondering, why would someone call the police from the gym that's only a few minutes away? But before I get into that, let me answer another question you might be asking. Who is Chris Coleman? Welcome to Timeless Mysteries. Please like and subscribe. Today, we look at a truly despicable, premeditated crime that will pull on your heartstrings. 3 victims, 1 grieving father, and a lot of evidence that just doesn't add up.
We're investigating a triple homicide here in the city of Columbia. Deceased at the home at 2854 Robert Drive is a female by the name of Sherry Coleman. She's 31 years old. And her 2 children, Garrett Coleman, who's 11 years old, and Gavin Coleman, who is 9 years old.
Chris Coleman was born into a devout Christian family. His father was a pastor who emphasized faith, morality, and community involvement. After high school, Chris enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps, where he served honorably. Upon leaving the Marines, he used his military training to secure a position in the security office at the Joyce Meyer Ministries, a prominent evangelical organization where he was tasked with protecting Joyce Meyer and her staff. From the outside, he seemed like a typical middle-class family man. He often appeared at church events with his family, seemed attentive to his children, and presented the outward image of a devoted husband. Neighbors recall him as friendly and respectable. In fact, they told officers they had seen him playing catch in his front yard with his boys just the day before. As police scoured the scene for clues, several details stood out. There was no sign of forced entry, just open doors and windows, as if begging someone to walk in. The house was eerily undisturbed aside from the strange words left on the wall. Other than that, nothing seemed out of place. The boys, so young, had no chance. There was no defensive wounds and no signs of any struggle at all. They probably never even woke up. But Sherry Coleman's death told a different story. She fought back with every ounce of strength she had, her body bearing the marks of a vicious struggle. It was desperate, brutal, but in the end, she lost. The messages on the walls were terrifying, and the officers began to wonder, could this blood-red graffiti be a message from a serial killer? When Chris finally arrived, police expected to see a distraught father, panicked and desperate for information. Instead, they encountered behavior that raised several red flags. Though he claimed he had feared for his family's life, Chris did not rush inside to check on them. While Chris appeared tearful, he did not show the frantic disbelief or anger one might expect from a protective parent. To many on the scene, his emotional response appeared oddly controlled. Observers noted fresh scratches on Chris's arms. When questioned later at the station, he was wearing shorts and a t-shirt and told the officer he was cold. The officer brought him a blanket, yet he mainly used it to conceal these marks on his arms. Chris's timeline didn't add up. He stated he'd left for the gym early that morning, which conflicted with his phone records and CCTV footage. As detectives began to examine the grisly scene, looking at the bedrooms, the graffiti, and Coleman's controlled responses, they quickly had the foundation for a highly suspicious murder investigation. But let's take a step back for a moment. Chris made a frantic 911 call from the gym. Why would he do that? To answer that, we have to examine the story Chris began weaving 6 months prior to that phone call. Chris Coleman had been reporting threatening emails. According to him, an unknown zealot hated the Joyce Meyer Ministries, which was his employer, and stated that they would kill Coleman's family unless he quit his security job. Going to the gym served as his alibi, and those emails explained why he was worried enough to make a call to 911. As the story became clearer, investigators quickly noted the contradictions. Chris was a seasoned Marine and security officer who claimed to be worried about his family's safety. Yet the home was unsecured and lacked a working surveillance system. Chris crafted a role he intended to play out for the investigators, but actors need to practice their lines, and Chris's statements and phrases and mannerisms didn't seem natural in any way. Police took note of something more important than all the mounting evidence combined. Why didn't Chris ask how his family died? Instead of charging through the police tape, he collapsed on the floor, curled up into the fetal position, and started crying. Chris probably believed they were buying his story. Additionally, Sherry's friends and relatives revealed that Coleman was having an affair with Tara Lentz, a one-time family friend. However, Chris denied this, but it was quickly confirmed. There was phone records, nude photos, IP addresses, and the affair all led detectives to the same conclusion. Chris was the killer. In the hours immediately following the death of the Coleman family, detectives brought Chris Coleman downtown for questioning. Although investigators had only preliminary observations like Chris's oddly controlled demeanor, the scratches on his arms, and a timeline that didn't quite add up, they knew there was more to uncover. Chris began to speak about these threatening emails again. He claimed to have received them up to a couple days prior to this attack. At first, these messages seemed valid, albeit a long shot, but detectives continued interviewing him and found additional inconsistencies. They decided to take a much closer look at those emails. Over the next several days, forensic specialists combed through the IP logs, email headers, and Coleman's electronic devices. That deeper analysis revealed a critical breakthrough. The so-called anonymous threats could be traced directly back to Chris himself. This discovery didn't happen all at once. It took multiple interviews and methodical digital analysis, but once investigators linked the emails to Coleman's own IP address and phone records, it became clear that the supposed zealot was nothing more than a fabricated persona he had created to throw suspicion off of himself. As soon as investigators determined that Chris Coleman had staged the email threats, the truth became undeniable. The elaborate ruse, a calculated attempt to fabricate a narrative of external hostility, was nothing more than a desperate bid to divert suspicion. Instead, it backfired spectacularly. It was the final nail in the coffin for Chris Coleman, as all of his credibility evaporated. On May 19th, just 2 weeks after the murders, Coleman was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. If you're asking yourself, did he really do it? Experts widely assert that framing someone this meticulously across digital, forensic, and behavioral evidence would be nearly impossible. Could Coleman have been framed? Law enforcement training does teach investigators to be alert to planted clues, but rarely do they encounter attempts so intricate that they include multiple independently verifiable pieces of evidence that are all pointing to the same suspect. Of course, no system is perfect, but in Coleman's case, each layer of physical and digital proof consistently pointed back to him. Taken together, these factors made it highly improbable that he was the victim of a deliberate setup.
Prosecutor Chris Wrights did not say much. Coleman felt them die, Your Honor. He's capable of strangling innocent children.
In 2011, a jury nearly found Coleman innocent with a 7-5 vote. However, after one juror discovered a discrepancy in the timeline of the affair, everything changed. They found a photo of Chris kissing his mistress 1 month earlier than what he had claimed in testimony. It became obvious that if he could lie about that, he could lie about anything. After a long deliberation, Chris was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without parole. People inside and outside of the courtroom cheered in approval.
Columbia Police Chief Joseph Edwards believed if there's a case for execution, Chris Coleman was it, but he agreed it would not bring closure.
For anybody involved or associated with this case, closure does not happen when a 9-year-old, an 11-year-old, and their mother are murdered while they're in their bed, in their home, in the city of Columbia or anywhere else, in any city, in any country.
Judge Milton Wharton said a decision to execute would be symbolic without leading to any closure. He gave Coleman life in prison without parole, calling the loss of freedom the most potent retribution.
What truly goes on in the minds of these killers? Chris Coleman's case is nothing short of heinous, leaving many of us grappling with the haunting question, how could you do this? How do you kill somebody you love? But here's another question. Are we becoming numb to these unimaginable tragedies? While each story is unique, there's one unsettling thread that ties family annihilators together. What drives them to commit such horrifying acts? And what dark secrets do they all try to hide? Many of you know I've spent quite a bit of time exploring the Chris Watts case. Along the way, I've uncovered some chilling insights about family annihilators that you really have to hear. In my next video, find out what 3 factors drive a person to kill. For those of you who love my trivia, here's something to think about. How many serial killers do you think you've unknowingly walked past in your lifetime? Drop your best guess in the comments. As always, be kind, stay vigilant, and never stop questioning the truth. I'll see you in the next video.